For as long as there has been human evolution, and I'm talking over 5 million year old human evolution, the root ingredient in our food system has come through plants. Whether you eat plants directly, which you probably should, or you eat animals who have eaten plants, which you should probably do less, you can see that plant material is our fuel foundation. For most of the last 5 million years, we have not used chemical fertilizers. The poisonous ingredients that are remaining remnants of World War I trench warfare. You could say that for plants, the poisonous gas attacks, the kind that ended for humans at the end of World War I, have not ended. Most chemical fertilizers are still using poisonous World War I ingredients. Now, allow me to take you to a place where chemical poisons have been extinguished. It's in Golden Gate Park on top of the Academy of Sciences Museum, and their website describes it as a wonder. An exclusive native California habitat has been restored on the roof. In a minute, we're going to talk with the landscape supervisor who helped build the Living Roof Museum exhibit. He's the soil shaman dirt doctor who created a new native habitat. As an expert horticulturalist, he can effectively illustrate the difference between plant health in toxic chemical fertilizers and what natural fertilizers are like. It's an important soil biome difference because our health effectively comes from plants. You might not know that squirrels and rats are closely related, except that the lifespan of a rat is short at about 2 years, and a squirrel lifespan is longer at over 15 years. What might be causal for the 650% longer average lifespan between closely related species? Rats are surrounded by poisonous excrement. Squirrel excrement falls away from the trees. I point this out because the chemicals you surround yourself can have an impact on your lifespan. Imagine adding that 650% lifespan increment as a human. You'd live until you were 487 years old. Now, allow me to bring on our guest horticulturalist with perspectives in healthcare, Jeff Day. He's a dirt doctor who can make a difference. Destroyed soils need a shaman to save them. Welcome, Jeff. Thank you.
Hi, Dustin. Good morning. Thank you.
What are the typical ingredients in chemical fertilizers and where do they come from?
Well, let's start with nitrogen, a process of nitrogen that comes from the crude oil. It comes from oil that's pumped out of the ground and then it's processed. And although some of it comes in the form of gasoline, one of the byproducts of that is nitrogen. And that's a nitrogen that's blended into fertilizers such as ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, and urea, and finds its way onto many of the crops that we find in the Central Valley in California. The second one would be potassium, comes in the form of K2O, also another result of the processing of chemical crude oil, which is made into gasoline, made into kerosene for jet fuel, made into all sorts of things. But one of the byproducts, again, is can be used in fertilizer. And then finally, phosphorus, P2O5 is the form that the plant takes it up in. And again, another result of petrochemical. Let's go into potassium then. So potassium is would be the final ingredient, would be K2O, and that would be of the major elements that plants need, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The final one would be in the form of K2O, which is also a result of crude oil refining. You end up in N2O, you end up with P2O5 and K2O, which are all specific to plants and readily uptakeable, which is beneficial for the plant in some ways, but is very disadvantageous to the soil structure.
From the perspective of the plant, what's it like to get chemical fertilizer?
The plant would get a rush of the three chemicals, the three main chemicals. There's about 16 different elements that plants need to survive. But the main three, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, would be in the form readily uptakeable by the plant. So they get a rush of all of these substances, these elements. And so in the beginning, you'd be a very happy plant having a chemical that is one of the essential ingredients that you need to live. However, after that, the plant becomes dependent on that, and without that would quickly die, would quickly start to kind of falter a little bit. And then without continued use of those types of elements in fertilizer, you would find that the plant would quickly start to wilt and would quickly die. So multiple applications of these fertilizers are necessary, and hence the multi-billion-dollar petrochemical fertilizer business you see out in the Central Valley of California. As far as the plant experience, so the plant would be quite happy and quite healthy to begin with. However, if you stopped applying these fertilizers shortly after you stopped applying them, they would start to die. So the plant becomes dependent, becomes almost like a drug addict in that way. And without those substances, without those elements, you'd find the plant quickly declining and quickly dying. One of the major factors in that is what happens to the soil structure. So when you apply ammonium nitrate, as the name applies, there's ammonia in that. And so that acidifies the soil. And so that acid really quickly starts to kill all of the beneficial bacteria, all the beneficial fungi, all the little kind of what we'd call the creepy crawlies that are in the soil that actually help plants. It slowly starts to kill that off. And so over time, you end up with a soil that's basically sterile. So you are dependent on that type of fertilizer to continue, if you want to continue to grow corn or rice or whatever your crop may be, you're almost obligated to use a petrochemical type fertilizer because the soil structure in those areas is depleted to the point where it won't sustain life, plant life.
There's a strawberry plant that I have in a container that I got from Home Depot in my yard, and it has this burned characteristic to it. Like its experience of having that burned limb is not the same as a thriving limb. Now, do you think that might be related to its soil experience?
Definitely. What happens sometimes when you see a little bit of burned leaf fringe like that, sometimes it's the fertilizer that's been used. So if you use something like Miracle Grow, which is a petrochemical type fertilizer, it has chlorides and chlorine in it. And if you mix it a little bit too heavily, then that excess chloride or chloramine can get into the plant, and it actually burns the fringes of the plant. Sometimes the tap water that you use, since it's chlorinated, or many municipalities use chloramine, if there's a little bit too much of that in the water, just in the basic tap water that you use to water it, that can also burn the plant.
So let's talk about the nutrition that we can expect through plants that use natural fertilizer versus chemical fertilizer? What kind of top line impact are we talking about?
Okay, so just like plants need phosphorus, need nitrogen, need potassium, so do humans. And what you find in the plant that's been fertilized with petrochemical fertilizers like Miracle-Gro, excuse me, you'll find that it only has the nitrates and nitrites that are in the fertilizer, potassium in the form of K2O and phosphorus in the form of P2O5. You don't find any variance on that, where the human body needs all sorts of different types of potassium, needs all sorts of different types of phosphorus and nitrogen, as well as what they call the microelements. So you're looking at molybdenum, magnesium. So petrochemical fertilizers have very trace amounts of those elements. And so you'll find that the produce that you eat from something that's been fertilized with a petrochemical type fertilizer does not have the quantity of magnesium, molybdenum, calcium. There are about 16 elements in plants that are very needed in very trace amounts that would be very low quantity wise in the plant, whereas a plant that's been fertilized with a natural type fertilizer would be abundant in these elements.
The nutrients that I hear you describing, the potassium, the calcium, the magnesium, these are all common supplements that humans are craving that could be attributed to getting them primarily through the soil into the plants that have been cut off since chemical fertilizer.
That's exactly right. So pre-World War I, when things like manure were used as fertilizer, or when we used much more natural fertilizers, the human body was getting plenty of those elements from the plants, from the produce that people ate, from the foods that people consumed were naturally high in these elements. Whereas today they might be high in a certain type of potassium, a certain type of phosphorus, and a couple of different types of nitrogen, but the rest of the plant is very depleted in those other elements. Hence the need for people these days to take multivitamins and different types of vitamins to supplement the vitamins that they used to get in just eating healthy produce.
Tell me about the soil environment for the living roof at the Academy of Sciences, where you were a landscape construction superintendent.
Okay, so at the Academy of Sciences, we planted multiple types of California native plants. We worked with Rana Creek down near Santa Cruz, and they brought us a bunch of samples. And we started off with just 4 types of plants. We started with the beach strawberry. We started with California poppies. We used a miniature type of lupin, a plantain, and a type of yarrow. And so we had a big challenge to begin with because the local birds found that, and so they were getting in there. We had all sorts of nice little bugs in the soil, and so we had a little bit of a bird problem to begin with. But so we planted that rooftop, and then we supplemented we sprayed on endo and ectomycorrhizae so that we'd get great root growth and fertilize everything with the natural type of fertilizer. And we found over time, although we had challenges with birds and the wind and the slope on the rooftops, some of the rooftop has about a 60% slope. So when watering that, getting everything, the irrigation dialed in was definitely a challenge. But that was a major success in the long run of using native plants for a living roof. It helps cool the building, and it's a great rooftop.
Before that, some of your soil experiences were with redwood trees at Stern Grove.
Yeah, I was involved in the construction of the Stern Grove, the concert area, where we did a bunch of stonework, And we, in doing that with all the contractors there and getting the stage built and everything, we had definitely a challenge with soil compaction from all the trucks and machines and everything that we used in construction. So after we were finished, we went ahead and in a large 100-gallon tank mixed some endo and ecto mycorrhizae with some natural fertilizers, and with a spray gun went out there, and I personally did it, went out and sprayed all the area around the redwood trees, sprayed the new turf that we had planted out there, and sprayed everything. And it was amazing how quickly everything returned. The redwood trees in that area were very stressed out. They were starting to turn a little bit yellow. And these are redwood trees that are probably 50 to 75 years old. And just all the compaction from all the traffic and everything, construction, all the tractors and everything used that was involved in the construction of the concert area there, stressed out the trees. And so with a few applications of endo and ecto mycorrhizae and some natural fertilizer, within about 2 months, everything not only came back to the standard that it was before, but was thriving. And we noticed that things were really looking great. That's when we knew, my partner and I, Jake, that's when we knew that we were really onto something with spraying mycorrhizae.
Sounds like vegetative healthcare for redwood trees.
Definitely. It was really, it was amazing to see just within about 15 minutes after spraying. It was amazing to look up into the canopy of the trees and see this bright green growth and see how happy the trees were after we sprayed it.
Jeff has also been the chief landscape engineer for another iconic Bay Area location. He managed horticulture at Caballo Point Lodge in Sausalito, California, under the northern end of the Golden Gate Bridge, a place on the National Register of Historic Places. How would you describe the soil dynamics at the Golden Gate National Recreation Area?
So this was quite a challenge. So this was a former Army base in Sausalito that had been turned into a hotel. And so when I first started there, we had a fairly new landscape. They re-landscaped most of the area, and we had not only the old Army base, the old Army quarters, officers' quarters that were turned into hotel rooms, but a new contemporary area that was eco-friendly, built with environmentally conscious process, and with the solar panels, with actually with torn up levis as the insulation. But the soil structure there, having been an Army base, was really terrible because they had used petro fertilizers for probably 50 years prior to that. So if you took a shovel and tried to dig, you'd really hit some hard pan soil. And so we wanted to loosen that up. We wanted everything to be healthy. And so I started using a fertilizer called Down to Earth, and then blending that with my own endo and ecto mycorrhizae, and started making compost tea, and started using that, started applying that about once every 2 months to the soil throughout the whole area, which was about 33 acres, and noticed over time that not only did we see much improved plant health, but much improved soil structure as well, so that when you went in to make an irrigation repair, for example, and you had to do some digging, that you didn't need a pick anymore, that you could pretty easily get through it with a shovel. And it was amazing how quickly the soil structure changed, how all of the biome, the mycorrhizae had developed a mycelial web, and with beneficial bacteria, it really loosened the soil up to the point where it wasn't really hard pan everywhere, but you could really get in there with a trowel or a shovel, and very easily dig.
It sounds like this dynamic, rich, alive soil system allows for deeper interconnectivity with the plant system, ultimately delivering more valuable nutrients through the plants to the humans that we appear to be cut off from since World War I.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So at the hotel at Cavallo Point, we didn't necessarily grow crops that were edible, but at the same time, I used that as sort of my laboratory. I had 33 acres of plants, and many of those plants were California native plants that were used to having a more natural fertilizer, not the Miracle Grow type fertilizer being applied to them. So they didn't need the amount of nutrient a native plant is used to dealing with less. With California being having a rainy season from about November through about March or April, and being dry the rest of the year, is used to some stresses. So actually using petrofertilizer on that gave it a little too much nutrient, and so not only burning the soil, but the plant being sort of over nutrified, if you will. So as soon as we started using the natural fertilizer and the mycorrhizae, we used actually a little less than was needed on some of the other regular landscape plants, and we noticed immediately that they responded to that and really started to take off. So we were able to go from very small 4-inch type pots, plants that we had planted, to big, blooming, beautiful plants within a year.
Jeff's grandparents lived on a vintage apple farm near Pescadero, California. Jeff, how would you describe the place? How did it impact your career in horticulture?
Well, I would visit them for a couple of weeks every summer, and then visit around Thanksgiving and visit around Christmas. And my grandmother was an avid gardener and was an expert in all things that related to plants. And so her love of plants definitely filtered down to me. And every time I would visit, I'd find myself out in the apple orchard eating apples from trees that were over 100 years old. It was originally an orchard that was used, the apples were used for cider. Hard cider. So, not that I was drinking hard cider as a youngster, but just being in that environment. She had a small nursery at the other end of their property that was called Old Jackson Orchard Nursery, that my father later turned into a very successful operation. Just being exposed to that as a kid really fostered my love of plants and all things horticulture.
Jeff's soil engineering has led him to start Five Brothers Natural Fertilizer. What does this product contribute to plants, and where can people find it?
Well, what does it contribute to plants? It contributes to whether you're growing a plant that you're going to be eating, if you're an avid tomato gardener, or if you are into kale or any of the other things that people plant in their gardens. And using this product, you'll find that the nutrients from the fertilizer transfer directly into the nutrition value of the plant itself. So whatever you eat that you've grown with this fertilizer, you'll find that it's much healthier for you than something that's non-organic that's bought in the store. As far as the endo and ecto mycorrhizae, you'll find in your garden that the root structure of your plants will definitely be much more vigorous, and you'll find that your entire garden over time will become a thriving, beautiful place that you'll love to spend time in gardening. This product is one that within the first few applications, you'll notice a difference in the plant health, but as you continue to apply it, you'll find that your entire garden is a much healthier place as far as the plants that you harvest and eat. But not only that, but the health of the plants themselves, and you'll find a beautiful, green, thriving garden that you'll be working in.
Let's take a gimbal walk with Five Brothers Natural Fertilizer on my goji berries. A gimbal walk is a lean methodology term to describe a firsthand experience. My goji berry plant is a descendant of the goji berries that came to California with the Chinese laborers who built the first transcontinental railroad. It was easy to add the mix to the watering can with my first year of goji berry production that lasted from May through October. How would you describe the plant experience with your natural fertilizer?
Okay, so in Novato, California, I started my garden very in earnest with a couple of redwood boxes. One was about 4 by 8, the other was about 4 by 16, and started with kale, started with tomatoes, pepper plants. Planted around it were some roses. And I noticed that after I started using this type of fertilizer, I had a control and a test. So I put some Miracle Grow on one part of the garden, and I used my blended fertilizer on the other. And I found that from the outset that the plants that were watered with Miracle Grow appeared much more green, thriving, beautiful. And I noticed that it took a while for my plants that I had fertilized with my personal blend of fertilizer, took a little bit longer to get to size, took a little bit longer to look like they were thriving, took a little bit longer to get up to speed. But I found that it was almost like the tortoise and the hare, whereas I had the tortoise. I had to be a little bit more patient with, but in the end, those plants, those tomato plants, those pepper plants were still producing tomatoes and peppers into late November. I was still harvesting, whereas the plants that I had watered and fertilized with the Miracle Grow type fertilizer had come and gone much more quickly. The tomatoes came on more quickly with the Miracle Grow type fertilizer. The tomatoes appeared very big and luscious, but they were full of water. They didn't have any flavor. The plants that I had fertilized with my blend of fertilizer, the Five Brothers type, I noticed had much more flavor. They were much more nutritious, and they, in the end, were much more healthy, thriving plants. And over time, as that mycelial web developed, all of my landscape plants were much more resilient as far as drought. If I had turned my drip system off for a couple of weeks while I was on vacation, I noticed that when I came back, everything was much more resilient as far as drought tolerance. I didn't need to water quite as much. The plants that I had used the petrochemical fertilizer, if I failed to water them for 2 or 3 days, would start to wilt and die. Whereas the plants that I had fertilized with the Five Brothers fertilizer were much healthier and much more resilient.
That's an incredible impact on the water table of a natural fertilized landscape.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's roll this up to the top of chemical versus natural fertilizer. Though chemical fertilizers increase crop production, their overuse has hardened the soil, decreased fertility, strengthened pesticides, polluted air and water, and released greenhouse gases, thereby bringing hazards to human health and environment as well. On the other
Absolutely.
side, we have natural fertilizers that give us the nutrients that we're craving and seeking in the supplement industry.
Absolutely, Dustin. Well said.
Jeff, thanks for being on Voices in Healthcare. Tell us again where people can find your natural fertilizer.
All right. Well, first off, thanks, Dustin, for this interview. I really appreciate the time with you. And folks are looking for a great natural fertilizer. You can go to shop.fivebrothersfertilizer.com.